The mansion's golden lights glimmered against the vast night, spilling onto gardens trimmed to perfection, as if even the roses were expected to obey. From a distance, it looked untouchable, a palace carved out of ambition, a symbol of victory. Yet inside its marble halls lingered the quiet ache of loneliness, a silence so deep it pressed against the walls like a second skin. Daniel Moretti, heir to a fortune that stretched across continents, carried everything the world envied: wealth that commanded nations, power that bent men to his will, influence that filled newspapers with his name. And yet, in the rare hours when the house was emptied of guests, when laughter and flattery no longer echoed through chandeliers of crystal, the empire felt like nothing more than a gilded prison. He would walk the endless corridors lined with portraits of ancestors, their painted eyes heavy with judgment. He would pause before glass windows tall as cathedrals, staring out at the restless city beneath him, cars streaming like veins of light, voices humming in the distance. The world was alive, moving, free. And he, despite owning all of it, remained trapped. No one expected that the one person who would pierce through the glass walls of his life would not be a rival with sharper teeth, nor a woman drawn by wealth, but a quiet maid, her presence barely noticed, her footsteps softer than the rustle of curtains. To most, she was invisible, a shadow moving between rooms. To him, she would become the spark that carried a truth he had long forgotten, that sometimes the smallest voice is the one that changes everything. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. The city never truly slept. Even at dawn, the towers of glass caught the pale sun like mirrors of pride. Inside one of the tallest and the headquarters of Moretti Enterprises, the rhythm was relentless, heels striking marble floors, the sharp click of pens against glass tables, the low murmur of voices rehearsing loyalty. Daniel Moretti sat at the head of the boardroom, his tailored suit fitting like armor, but his silence betrayed a fracture unseen by those around him. Executives flattered, laughed too loudly, and whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. Their arrogance filled the air like smoke, suffocating in its weight. To them, he was the king who no longer commanded the same awe. He was young to carry an empire, and they mistook his measured calm for weakness. At the back of the room, unnoticed, a maid moved quietly, refilling glasses, her presence fading into the background like a shadow against the polished floor. She kept her eyes low, though every word of scorn thrown in Daniel's direction echoed within her chest as if the ridicule were hers. The antagonist of the hour, Silvio Romano, the company's most boastful executive, leaned forward with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. He spoke of profits, of expansions, of Daniel's father's legacy, and how it was slipping away in the son's unsteady hands. Laughter followed like a chorus of knives, each chuckle puncturing Daniel's silence. But Daniel did not rise. He did not defend. He let the voices wash over him, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. And while the room laughed, the outsider's eyes shimmered faintly, as if holding a truth no one could yet see. The boardroom transformed into a stage, every smirk and whisper feeding the spectacle. Silvio Romano, swollen with arrogance, leaned back in his chair, his voice carrying the weight of cruel amusement. "Tell us, Daniel," he said loudly enough for the entire room to pause. "What would you do differently? Or do you need a moment to call your father's ghost for advice?" The table erupted in laughter, sharp and echoing. Some executives even pulling out their phones to capture the moment. The young heir cornered, the giant's son reduced to ridicule. Daniel's silence stretched like a blade between them. He neither flinched nor spoke, only lifted his eyes slowly, his expression unreadable, his calm unsettled some, though the noise tried to bury it. At the far end, the maid lingered, clutching the water pitcher so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had seen men like Silvio before, men who confused cruelty for power. She wished she could speak, wished someone would, but her role was not to exist in these rooms, only to sweep the traces of them once they were gone. Silvio pressed further, rising now. His words meant to humiliate. Or maybe it's easier to let others decide for you. Come now. Show us if you truly belong in this chair, or admit you're just a boy playing king. The room roared with approval, the sound bouncing off the marble, growing louder, hungrier. No one believed he would even try, but the silence that followed spread across the hall like fire. The silence was heavier than the laughter had ever been. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his hands with a patience that unnerved those who expected outrage or retreat. His eyes, steady and cool, traveled slowly across the room. "If I were playing king, Silvio," he said at last, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise, "I would know better than to mistake noise for power." The room shifted. The laughter faltered, though a few nervous chuckles tried to resurrect it. Silvio's smirk froze, though he quickly forced it back into place, unwilling to yield ground. "Big words," he scoffed, "but words don't build empires. Tell us then, what do you see that the rest of us don't?" Daniel's gaze returned to the skyline visible through the glass walls. The city glowed like a restless beast, lights flickering, cranes moving, traffic pulsing below. He pointed, almost absently. "Expansion isn't just about markets, it's about people. You've forgotten that." It was subtle, barely a spark, but something in the room shifted. Some of the younger executives, hungry for a sign of direction, glanced toward him with quiet curiosity. Could it be that the heir had thought further ahead than they assumed? At the edge of the room, the maid paused mid-step, her breath catching. For the first time, she looked at him not as her employer, but as a man carrying weight no one else could see. Silvio chuckled harshly, masking his hesitation. "People, spare us the poetry. Numbers win wars, Daniel. Numbers keep us fed. Don't dress failure in sentiment." The others laughed again, but weaker now, their voices less certain, and just when everyone thought Daniel would break, something was revealed that no one expected. The weight of the room leaned heavily toward Silvio, but Daniel's stillness began to unsettle even the boldest voices. He rose slowly from his chair, every movement deliberate, his shadow stretching long against the glass wall where the city shimmered. "Numbers," Daniel said, his tone calm, steady, "are only as strong as the hands that build them. You speak of markets, of profits, of power, but tell me, Silvio, how many names do you remember? The janitor who opens these doors before dawn, the driver who delivers your documents, the men and women who build the towers you boast about? Do they exist in your empire, or only in your shadow?" The air stilled. The words were not shouted, yet they struck with the force of something undeniable. Executives exchanged uneasy glances. The truth in his question lingered like smoke they could not wave away. Silvio's smirk faltered for the first time. His laugh came too late, too brittle. "Romantic notions," he said, forcing bravado. "You sound like a poet, not a leader." But his voice did not carry the same thunder. The maid, still half hidden at the back, felt something stir in her chest, an invisible string pulling tight. She had served silently for years, collecting fragments of conversations, invisible to the men who threw words like weapons. Yet here was Daniel, speaking of the forgotten, as if he truly saw them. The marble silence of the boardroom began to shift. Executives leaned forward. Some eyes glittered with doubt, not in Daniel, but in Silvio. It wasn't just skill, it was dignity. And suddenly, silence fell across the crowd. Silvio's jaw tightened. He rose from his chair, trying to reclaim the stage, his voice booming with desperate laughter. "Dignity doesn't pay dividends, Daniel. You want to run a charity? Then step aside. This is business, and business has no room for dreamers." He slammed his hand on the table for effect, but the sound no longer commanded the room. The echo died quickly, replaced by the quiet weight of expectation. All eyes turned toward Daniel. Daniel did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're right, Silvio. Business has no room for dreamers, but it also has no future for men who mistake greed for vision." He reached into his jacket pocket and laid a single folder on the polished table. Its presence alone silenced the last nervous laughter. "For weeks, I've reviewed every division, every partnership. Do you know what I've found? Losses hidden behind exaggerated reports, projects signed without oversight. Your projects, Silvio." The room froze. Gasps rippled like cracks across glass. Silvio's face drained of color, though he forced a sneer. "Lies. You're bluffing." Daniel opened the folder, page by page, revealing numbers, signatures, contracts, the silent testimony of betrayal. Executives leaned in, their whispers rising into a storm. The man who had mocked Daniel's silence now drowned in it. For the first time, Daniel's gaze hardened, not just steady, but piercing. This company was built by hands calloused with work, by sacrifices no one remembers. I won't let you turn it into your game of arrogance, not while I'm here. The maid's breath trembled. The words carried beyond the boardroom, beyond walls of power. It was not money speaking, but truth. Silvio's fist clenched, but his power had already slipped. The room no longer looked at him. They looked only at Daniel. But the final blow came not from power. It came from a truth everyone had tried to forget. The boardroom no longer belonged to Silvio. His words hung in the air like broken glass, sharp but powerless. The executives avoided his gaze, their loyalty evaporating in silence. Daniel closed the folder gently, as though sealing something heavier than paper. He did not gloat, did not raise his voice. He simply stepped away from the table, his presence larger now in its calm restraint. "This company doesn't need louder men," he said softly. "It needs better ones." With that, he slid the folder toward the center of the table and turned his back to the storm he had just calmed. His stride was unhurried, almost serene as he moved toward the exit. On the way, he paused only once, where the maid stood, still clutching the pitcher, her eyes wide with something she dared not speak. For the briefest moment, their gazes met. He gave her a nod, not of command, but of recognition. And in that silent gesture, she felt seen for the first time in years. Behind him, Silvio's voice cracked with rage. "You think this is over? You'll regret this." But no one echoed him. His words died in the marble silence, swallowed by the weight of his own insignificance. Daniel walked away, the echo of his footsteps steady and unbroken. And as he left the room, no one dared laugh again, for they finally understood what they had witnessed. The days that followed rippled through Moretti Enterprises like a quiet revolution. Silvio's arrogance crumbled under the weight of his own lies, his name erased from the boardrooms he once dominated. Executives, once blinded by ambition, began to weigh their choices with new eyes. Respect replaced mockery. Silence became listening. Yet Daniel sought no victory parade. He walked the halls with the same calm he had carried into that boardroom, though those around him now moved differently, less sure of their cruelty, more cautious of their laughter. It was not fear he inspired, but something rarer, dignity. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the mansion, the maid polished silver in the dim light of morning. She recalled the nod he had given her, that brief acknowledgement that her existence mattered in a world that often pretended she was invisible. It was only a moment, but moments, when rooted in truth, can alter lives. The story spread beyond the walls of the company. Workers spoke of it in hushed tones. Other firms echoed its lessons. Slowly, an empire once measured in numbers began to be measured in the lives it touched. In a world blinded by arrogance, sometimes a single act of quiet dignity is enough to change the course of history.